Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jason Zacher, Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy here at the Greenville Chamber. We host these Community Matters discussions every week to connect you with local, state, and national leaders. You can find our past recordings as well as the upcoming Community Matters schedule at greenvillechamber.org. Now, a couple housekeeping things for everybody. All attendees should be on mute with your cameras turned off. Please submit your questions through the chat feature. We do want this to be an interactive discussion. And I'll post my contact information in the chat, so please feel free to call me or email me if you have additional questions later. So as you've probably heard over the last month, the federal government is working on a second stimulus package to help citizens recover and our businesses recover from COVID and the shutdowns we've seen in the economic downturn. Now, I've compiled a whole bunch of data points over the last week or so and trying to come up with the details of what we currently know about the stimulus package that's currently being debated in Congress. So I will be happy to run through that. We'll have a lot of information here in a very short period of time. So feel free to add in the chat and we'll come back when I'm finished and I'll go through some of the things. So 2 acts right now. We have the HEROES Act and the HEALS Act. So we'll go through the 2 of them real quick. Now the HEROES Act is the House Democrats version that passed the House Representatives on May 16th. It's a total of $3.4 trillion. Last week, the Senate Republicans countered with their plan, and it came out last Monday, and it's $1.1 trillion. Now, here's a quick breakdown of some broad areas of the HEALS Act versus the HEROES Act, and in the middle is the CARES Act and other stimulus bills that have already passed. So you can get a sense of how much money has been spent, about $3.2 trillion so far from the federal government. And then with the HEROES Act, the Democrats in the House and the Senate want $3.4 trillion. And you can see that breakdown. And on the left is the HEALS Act. That's the Republican counteroffer, which is about $1.1 trillion. Now, while it looks like we're just fighting over numbers in a lot of these different areas, there's a wide gulf between the 2 of these plans. And there's very little that is the same between the 2 of them. So I would say, again, very little overlap between the plans. That's a major challenge going forward. Now, the next question is going to be, well, who's going to win? Democrats right now, I would say, have the upper hand in the negotiations. The biggest reason for that is because the House Democrats, Senate Democrats are unified behind this plan. They understand what their plan is. They know what they want. Senate Republicans are a little wishy-washy on some certain parts of it. Majority Leader McConnell from Kentucky has said that they want liability. That's a deal breaker. Liability protections for business have to be in there. Now, even the president has said, well, that's negotiable. We may not need to do that. So as long as the Republicans don't have a united front, it makes it one of these kind of broad discussions on a major policy thing very difficult for them to coalesce behind. So I will highlight quickly for everyone, the chamber has not taken a position on either bill. Like a lot of bills this size, there are good things and bad things in each one of them. There are things we support in the Democrats' bill. There are things we support in the Republicans' bill. And so that makes it a little hard to say we support this. The U.S. Chamber has come out and said the same thing, that they like some things in the Democrats, something in the Republican bill. And now we need to figure out how to get them together. So here's the first thing everyone wants to know. Direct stimulus payments. How much money are you going to get in a check? This is actually probably the closest they are on a lot of this. So the House has $1,200 per person in your household, capped at $6,000. The Republicans have said $1,200 per adult, so $2,400 for married couples, $500 per dependent, but there is no cap. So in theory, you could have 10 dependents and you could get $6,400 under the Republican plan, which would be more than you get under the House plan. But they both agreed on an income phase out, just like there was before, $75,000 for an individual and $150,000 for a married couple. So you can see this is actually, sadly, probably the closest they are. Now comes one of the biggest sticking points, is unemployment payments. The HEROES Act in the House would extend the $600 unemployment, the federal unemployment contribution until the end of January next year. The Senate has countered with $200 a week in addition to your state unemployment until September, and that gives everyone time to come up with what would be about 70% of your salary until the end of the year. Now, there's some criticism from some business groups on this saying that either way, having that kind of cutoff and that kind of cliff is a problem, and they probably need to work on phasing it out, maybe have more than 70% of salary, maybe put it up to 80 or 90 because of the actual downturn in the economy and how severe it has been. So there's a lot they're going to have to work on. Both of them, neither one of the bills have any assistance for state unemployment insurance. So as the states are drawing down their unemployment insurance, businesses will wind up probably having to pay higher unemployment insurance rates starting next year, as early as next year. Right now in South Carolina, our General Assembly put $500 million of their CARES Act money into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund to try to shore it up, which hopefully will last for a while, and that should offset any increases later. But that's something that I know a lot of states are very concerned about moving forward. And then both of them have a lot of money, $2 billion, $1.3 billion for workforce training programs. All of the amounts are a little bit different. And I have a breakdown of those if you're interested. I can put that in the chat later, or I can email it to you. But they actually generally agree on some of that, but the amounts are completely different. Liability protections, I mentioned this before. The House has absolutely no liability protections for business. And this is a major thing for us. We've signed letters. We've been working with our congressional delegation on getting some basic liability protections for schools, for businesses, for healthcare. How do we make sure that customers or employees, if you are following local, state, or federal guidelines, how do you make sure you don't get sued because someone got COVID? Very difficult to prove that. But as a lot of business owners know, just that lawsuit is going to cost you a lot of money, even if they're looking for a settlement in a lot of cases. There are also protections in the Senate bill for manufacturers of PPE. So if you were a distillery that started making hand sanitizer, you'd be protected under Good Samaritan provisions that you're trying to do the help that the community needs on this. Protection for testing liability. So if you have tests and you let people come back and those kind of things, there are some protections there. And also allowing companies to help their gig workers and their contract workers without jeopardizing contract status. So that way you don't wind up under IRS guidelines or under federal labor law guidelines, having them be full-time employees because you're trying to help out your contract workers during this. That's all in the Senate bill. Again, the House has absolutely nothing addressing any of this. This is going to be a major sticking point for the business community and a major sticking point for the Senate Republicans. PPP changes. Now, the HEROES Act in the House would expand PPP to all nonprofits and local news broadcasters, which was an item on there that I didn't know local news broadcasters did not qualify for PPP, which I think is interesting. But a lot of nonprofits did not. If you're a 501c6 or other things, if you're a C3, you did, but C6s and others did not. The HEROES Act in the Senate would do 501c6s. The destination marketing, like Visit Greenville SC, and quasi-public entities would now be qualified for PPP. Now, I don't know exactly how they define quasi-public entities. Those are the kind of things that wind up in the regulations later. But something like the Bon Secours Wellness Arena, I know, did not qualify initially, and has been an issue that they're trying to figure out. So this is because they have public bonds that are paid for by public. They have a public board being paid for by taxes, so it's a quasi-public entity. So they, in theory, under the Senate, would be allowed to do this. They both expand the forgivable expenses under PPP. So initially, it was really on your rent, your employment, your payroll, things like that. This expands those to a lot more categories with PPP. PPE. Sorry, all the acronyms are running together in my head. And the House version does not have a second round of PPP. The Senate does. It has $190 billion in up to $2 million loans for really small businesses, so less than 300 employees. You have to meet the SBA revenue size standard, and you have to have at least 50% reduction in your gross receipts year over year. Now, the U.S. Chamber is a little concerned about that. They wish that gross receipts number was a little bit less, but that's what the Senate has proposed for now. We'll keep going. In a bill, any bill this size, as I mentioned at the top, has a lot of other stuff in it. So there is a lot of individual tax credits, and a lot of them are really good in both bills. So we'll run it down. Again, the Senate has a $5,000 tax credit for hiring unemployed individuals. The House has a plan that will give you a refundable tax credit for your mortgage, rent, and utilities up to $25,000 per quarter, which is a very substantial amount of money. Again, the other one doesn't have this in the bill. They both do have employee retention tax credit. The House one is up to $40,000. The Senate one's up to $19,000. So it's a little bit more lucrative in the House. And so I know some folks at the U.S. Chamber said that they hope the House one wins out on this. This is an interesting one in the Senate GOP, that if you live in one state and you work in another, typically you do have to pay income tax in both states at some level. if you work for less than 90 days in your state. So if you, commute from Connecticut to New York City and you did it for less than 90 days this year, now you don't have to pay New York income tax. That'll be interesting to see how a lot of the Northeastern states handle that. And I would say probably we have the same issue in Rock Hill and Charlotte, for example. And then in the House has a very generous refundable tax credit for self-employed individuals of up to $45,000, and the Senate has nothing in there. So as you can see, a lot of these things are going to have to be worked out. But again, you start going back to the big ones earlier when we're talking about liability protections, the unemployment. Those are the real sticking points. A lot of these other things will probably come together in some way, shape, or form as we move forward. Education and childcare. There are two more major sections of this, and then I'll open it up for a few questions. The House adds $7 billion to the Child Care Development Block Grant, and the Senate adds $5 billion. But the Senate also creates a what they call the Back to Work Child Care Credit of $10 billion to give 9 months of operational and financial aid to child care centers. I've spoken to a few childcare providers about this. They find that really fascinating. Again, they're concerned the devil's in the details, and we don't know a lot of the details yet. But anything, as far as the chamber is concerned, anything that would help us upgrade childcare, make it more accessible, and get more options out there, especially in this time, is something that we think is very valuable and worthwhile. And then again, they both put a lot of money into local schools and into local school districts. However, as typical in the Republican playbook right now, 2/3 of the Republican plan has to go to schools with in-person instruction. So again, they're doubling down on making sure that all children are going back to school. The final big sticking point are state aid provisions, right? So you've got the HEALS Act, which is the Senate GOP, gives a lot more flexibility on how you can use your CARES Act money. So in South Carolina, this is a big deal because there's still $600 million of our CARES Act money outstanding. The General Assembly appropriated about $1.2 billion of it back in June, and there's still about $600 million left that they're going to come back in September. So if this frees up a lot of what they can use it for, it would free up the General Assembly to be able to use it for different things. In the House, they're giving another $2 billion to every state initially, and then the rest would be distributed by population. So I don't know what that would mean for South Carolina yet, but obviously a lot of that would then go to New York, California, Florida, Texas, Illinois, et cetera. And then there's a bunch of money in the House version. Again, about $1 billion total, but $375 million would go to local governments, distributed along the community development block grant formulas. So the formula is already existing for municipalities and counties to be able to get some of this cash from the feds. So again, when you're looking at a $3 billion plan versus a $1 billion plan, another one of the $1 billion in between the two is right here in state aid provisions. They have said, Republicans have said off and on over the last several months that they're not interested in doing this. So it's another major contention. So what happens next? Do they trade the $1 billion in local governments for liability protections, or how do they do those things? That's where we go. The Congress has recessed for August. So right now, I'm sure they're negotiating behind the scenes, obviously, but there is no session going. Now, both of them, the House and the Senate, were told to be prepared to come back in case there was a deal on this. So I'm sure the leadership and obviously staff is working on it very, very hard at the moment. So that's the rundown of the major items. Are there any questions? I hope there are, because there's always a lot of discussion on these things. And I'm trying to see if I can get into the chat here real quick to see if there are any questions. There we go. All right. Do I understand it? Under the House plan, if a business receives PPP, there's no provision for a second round. Again, some of those details are going to have to be decided when they're looking at the regulations and how they determine that. I think that the Senate version, the purpose is for a second round, and people would be open to it even if they got the first round. Right now, the House is trying to. The House plan opens up some of the proposals for PPP and makes it a lot more flexible for being able to access that money. So if you thought you didn't qualify for it, you didn't have certain expenses, you may have certain expenses that you would be able to use now under the House plan. I would add, the House plan came out at the end of May, and they actually proposed it before then. So that was actually done well before we knew the results of PPP. I think that they knew there were some issues at the beginning of it, but they came out with that really quick. to discuss some of those issues. So right now, Steve, you are correct. There is no plan in the House for a second round of PPP, although my guess is that's one thing that they would be able to come back on. Steve Hall would like to see the first slides again. I'll show you. I'll come back to this one. This is the big one I think I'll highlight for everybody. Take a look at what we were talking about. Again, state and local aid. That's the big sticking point money-wise. All the rest of these are generally in line. Someone wants to fund one program versus another, but those things come together pretty quickly. The state and local aid is a major issue. And then as it says, safety net, tax cuts, those are some other programs, things like that they're trying to, the Democrats want to backfill that the Republicans aren't interested in. The Republicans' plan goes to stimulus checks and more small business aid. So that's really the big thing. So that's the nutshell of what they look like. One question I've received a lot from members over the last several weeks has been, when is this going to happen? How am I going to be able to apply and that stuff? And again, those details don't come out in the bill. These are hundreds of pages long and will be followed up, as we saw with PPP, with thousands of pages of regulations. And the regulations are again, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where some of the hiccups with the original PPP happened, that the Congress wanted this money to get out as quickly as possible. Small Business Administration and others had other ideas of how they needed to regulate how that money got out. And some of that winds up being, in conflict with what Congress wants. So any other questions from anybody? One other thing I wanted to mention real quick on this, when we look at some of these plans, if there are issues that you have, or there are things in this that you saw, any business credits, any of these kind of things, anything like that, let me know. And if you don't have a relationship with our congressional offices, I can get you in contact with them. I would highlight very, very strongly that our Lindsey Graham's office, Tim Scott's office, William Timmons' office, Jeff Duncan's office have all been extremely good at working with businesses on this. They are very responsive and they're very happy to do so. And so that's been a big thing we've been doing. And I know connecting, especially early on, connecting with their offices is something that I spent a lot of time in March and April working on. So more than happy to do that. Tina has a question. Any chance the eviction moratorium will come back? I don't know. That's another sticking point. Again, a lot of what I have seen on this deals with the money and a lot of these major things. The landlord support money is going to be the big issue, I think, when they come through with that. I have not heard of any discussions. I think that there's a big issue. I think that a lot of people were willing, and a lot of landlords I spoke to were very willing to cut some grace at the beginning. But now that we're looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, back when everyone thought this was going to be over in 12 weeks, I think it wasn't as big a deal, again, from the folks I was speaking to. But now I think that there's an understanding that landlords need to pay their taxes, they need to pay need to pay for their upkeep on properties, et cetera. But obviously folks that don't have jobs need assistance too. And so where does that come from? But I don't know the details of that, Tina. I can see what I can come up with an answer on that. Is all of the prior Fed stimulus amount gone? So you go back up to the top here, you can see the CARES Act money. That's the previous 2 or 3 bills that have passed from Congress. I think a lot of it is gone. Gone is a difficult word though, Steve, because again, South Carolina still has $600 million sitting around that they were waiting until September to decide. Obviously, Greenville County has a bunch of money still sitting around from their $91 million that they haven't decided what they're going to do with it yet, or has not been spent yet. When it comes to the PPP, last I heard, there was still a $180 billion still in there. A significant amount of money was still in the PPP program that has not been claimed. And I think that's one thing that they're trying to do with this, is to loosen up the restrictions on that and try to let folks go back out and go get it. And then as you look at, again, as the Senate's plan for a second round of PPP, that's obviously their proposal is a lot smaller, and that would hopefully go for a lot smaller businesses who are still being impacted now, again, months later than I think a lot of us anticipated back in April when the first bill passed. Our friend QT 19,000 wants to know, is there an effort to get a federal infrastructure bill going? Yes, there is a major push to get a federal infrastructure bill going. And I would have said that to you last year, and I probably would have said that to you the year before too. And I would have said that when Donald Trump took office in 2017, because that's what everyone thought was going to be first out the gate when Schumer, Pelosi, and President Trump all said that they needed to do an infrastructure bill. There is some discussion about it now, and I think that there was there was a little bit of movement on it back in January. But again, I'm not entirely sure the Democrats want to give the president a victory heading into the election, and vice versa. I think that they're willing to wait until January to see what we're talking about with an infrastructure bill. Now, it also depends on what you're talking about with infrastructure. There was a substantial amount of money ready to go, and I have to check to see if it is fully passed. But the House passed a significant amount of money for rural broadband and rural broadband mapping. That I know that the General Assembly here in South Carolina spent $50 million to jumpstart the program on trying to make sure that we knew who had broadband access, who did not, and how do we get that kind of access to everybody. That was really, really laid bare when we saw the impact of telemedicine, schools from home, things like that over the spring semester. And so I know that that's taken a lot of urgency. This is actually something I met with Congressman Clyburn and Congressman Duncan about back in last September. And it's interesting to have two that are probably on the opposite end of the political spectrum, both trying to push this bill through because they understand how important it is. And so I think that, again, COVID really exposed how important it is to get that. So it depends on how you're talking about infrastructure on that. But yeah, as far as a roads bill, a huge, traditional infrastructure bill, it is still, the negotiations are apparently ongoing. But I wouldn't count on something before the election. Okay, any other questions? I will put this in the chat also. Whoop. And I just undid that, I apologize. I need to share that again. As we're, hold on a second. Now I just messed up. I got too many windows open. My contact information I will put in the chat, and feel free to contact me if you have any other questions at the end of this, or if you're watching the Sunday talk shows and want to know what is going on with that. So there's my email. Oops, I think I just sent it to Steve Hall privately accidentally. That's my fault. I want to do one more thing real quick. If you to keep up with some of this beyond this meeting, we have, if you are not a member, we have an advocacy committee that meets the second Friday of every month, and that committee is open to all members. So any chamber investor who would like to come to that can come and can participate in a lot of those meetings. We have updates from our congressional offices, updates from county council, city council. We talk about a lot of these issues, local, state, and federal issues every month. And so if you want to keep up with those things, email me. I'm happy to loop you in on that email list so you get the invitations. But again, that is open to all investors, and it's free for anyone who wants to come. So we'd love to have you on those meetings every, the next one will be next Friday, actually at 8:30 a.m. So we'd love to have you. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments from anybody, I thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here. This recording will be shared on the Greenville Chamber's website, and it'll be sent to you all along with a survey to take at the end of this. And don't forget, this is part of an ongoing series, and next week we will have Julie Godshall-Brown talking about virtual talent tools. I noticed Julie had logged on here, so Julie, we'll look forward to hearing you next week. And we take time at the end of every call. Please do your part. You probably saw our press release last week calling on the county to please have a mask ordinance to try to arrest the spread of COVID-19. Please do your part in stopping the spread of coronavirus. We need businesses to be able to reopen. Please, from my perspective, I need my kids to go back to school. They're driving me crazy. But please do your part. Please care for your neighbors. Have a great day, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you all very much.